Hello and welcome back to Ross Examination. On this special episode on developing new deadly ideas to keep you ahead of the game. So I'm going to start this episode with a bit of a riddle, and it's from this book by Edward de Bono on creating new ideas and the use of lateral thinking, one of the best books I've ever read when it comes to thinking differently. And the riddle goes like this. There is a man who owes money to a moneylender, and he cannot pay it back. And if he can't pay it back, he's going to go to jail. So the moneylender says to him, well, I quite like the look of your daughter, so if you want, I can just take her instead and marry her. Now, the merchant and the daughter are horrified by this. So they say, absolutely not. So the moneylender, thinking a bit differently, thinks, okay, how about this? We'll play a little game. I will pick a white pebble and a black pebble up off the ground, and I'll put it in this pouch. If you pick the white pebble, I will let you go, you don't have to pay any money. If you pick the black pebble, your daughter becomes my wife. And they sort of look around thinking, well, if I don't do this, I'm going to go to jail, so we'll give it a go. So the daughter has to pick the pebble as well. Now, the daughter has a sharp eye, and she sees when the moneylender reaches down to pick up the pebbles, he actually picks up 2 black pebbles and puts them in. But no one else has seen this. So the question is, what can she do to get out of this situation? So if we think along normal lines, you'd think, well, they either call him out for lying, but if you do that, he'll just throw a bit of a fuss, not show you the pebbles, and then you're going to get in trouble. Your father's going to go to jail. The other 2 options are you play the game and you fall on your sword and you allow the moneylender to take you away and you become the wife, which isn't a very good option. And the third option is they could just refuse to take a pebble and not play the game. So those options aren't very good. So what could we actually do to get away from the situation? Now, I read this and kind of tried to think about it and paused for a little bit and thought, well, what can you do in this scenario? But de Bono has quite an interesting idea, and he talks a lot, and what we will be talking about in this episode is how we can get rid of these sort of preconceived assumptions we have about things to start expanding our view and think a little bit more laterally instead of vertically. And the solution he comes up with is that what you should do is the girl should take a pebble and then fumble around and drop it very quickly, and no one sees what it is because it falls back into the floor where there are loads of pebbles and no one knows what it was. And then she could say quite easily, well, I don't know what it was. What's left in the bag? Because that will tell us what I had. And then he will have to, without looking dishonest, pick out the black pebble, and they get away with it. So that's the little start. That's the riddle I wanted to go with. Now, before we go into the intro and the intro music, this is the final episode of the podcast, final episode of Human Alchemy until the new year, because we want to take a little break to come up with a few new ideas, hence the episode. And when we took a break last time, it was really good. We got a load of new ideas and we hit some really great milestones, but we are in the pursuit of excellence. So we're going to take another break and hopefully come back with some bigger guests, some great new topics for shows, and hopefully just produce a better product, because Sean and I are really enjoying doing it at the moment, but we want to do it right. We don't want to be having to sort of chase our tails, and we think a little break could be good. But today's episode is, as you've already heard, around developing new ideas. For me in my business, and for a lot of people I see, the ability to come up with new and innovative ideas is literally the life and death of what I do. When I have to come up with questions for a podcast guest, ideas for an episode, ideas for how to run an interesting exercise for my business when I'm doing a session with a group, literally anything, how I'm going to present a piece of content, whatever it is, my ability to come up with something different, a way to tell a story, is what allows me to stand out. And it's something that I've put a lot of time into getting better at, because it's a hard thing to do. But the good thing about it is it's very learnable. We can learn how to do this. So what I've done is I've put down all the learnings I've found myself, as well as extra research for this episode, into the next sort of 20, 30 minutes. So hopefully you can take something from this and be able to go away and develop new ideas, new ways of thinking. It's also for sales calls as well. Sometimes you need to summarize things really well and effectively. And the ideas that come for that is, that's the way to phrase, that's the way to finish it. The way we come up with those ideas is also crucial. But that is what the episode is about. So we are going to dive straight in. Now, anyone who listened to the last episode will have heard a fantastic Wild West style intro song that Sean developed. So sticking on that theme, let's kick in the saloon doors, pour ourselves a glass of knowledge, and get to it. So, developing new ideas. As I said, this book here is one I'd recommend to read straight away. And the first thing we're going to talk about is all around the whole theory. And the whole theory is an idea that De Bono puts forward, which is all around when we're coming up with new ideas, we actually need to dig new holes. What we're very good at when we're experts in certain areas is digging the same hole deeper. Because what happens is the more experience we get in a topic, the more we allow these sort of preconceived assumptions to become stronger. So we accept certain guardrails. So for example, in the story, the assumption is you have to play the game in a certain way. Thinking outside the box, or what we would call digging a new hole, would be, what if I drop it and do something a bit different? But in order to get into that state of mind, it's actually very hard, because the longer we are in a certain topic or a certain area, the more those barriers or assumed rules become stronger. If you think to sport, my sport was rugby, very few people can innovate within the game because we've been playing it for so long, we assume certain things are rules. Then you have coaches like Razzie Erasmus and other people who look at it in a very different way and start to come up with innovative things. So the challenge is, how do we stop digging things deeper? Because when we're experts, we're very good at, we know the topic, we can go deeper and deeper and deeper on the preconceived idea. But how do we come up with new ideas? Because a lot of the time, new ideas are not usually produced by experts thinking about things. And that's something we'll see as we go on. Now, I hope I'm not too jumpy on this episode, because I've got my notes in front of me. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll see we've got about 4 pages of notes here of all the things I want to discuss. But the whole idea around this whole theory is how experience forms assumptions. And I want to give you a few ways to how we can get away from those assumptions and those barriers. Now, one of the first ones is going into new environments. A load of ideas, take sport, come from other sports. So someone who is a rugby coach goes to an NFL environment, sees the way they do training, and they adapt it and bring that idea in. So we can use things from other places and bring them straight in. The other thing is speaking to other people. One way to dig new holes is to speak to people that don't have those preconceived ideas. So for example, if you are a CEO, you're probably the most experienced person in the company most times. If you go and ask your new joiners what they think about certain ideas, most of it will be rubbish. But you may get a few different ways of thinking about things that twig something with you. You're the one with the experience. You're the one that knows what you're talking about. They may just give you that slight different angle. One of my favorite examples of this is actually from the US Office. And if you haven't seen this, you don't need to know to understand, but there's a character in it who's known for being quite stupid called Kevin. And there is a very clever boss toward the end where the series actually went a bit downhill, if you ask me. But there's a character called Robert California who's very clever and strange. And he holds this meeting trying to find new ideas from the rank and file, as he puts it. And Kevin puts forward this idea about a vending machine. And he says, problem with a vending machine is the cookies, which are the main thing, aren't where the eyes go. They're too low down. They should put the things that everyone wants at eye level. And he's genuinely just talking about cookies because he's put forward as an idiot. But Robert California goes, right. So you're talking about our product line, and are we over pushing underperforming products? And then he suddenly thinks Kevin's this genius. But while it's a TV show, it's a perfect example of how this sort of thing works. You get this new way of thinking from someone with no experience and no assumptions, and then you with the experience can then take that new hole and start digging it deeper. So you go into it thinking, okay, I need a new idea. You've given me the new way of looking at it. I'm now going to excavate this hole. The hardest thing is finding the new hole in the first place. When we have all these assumptions, it's very hard to find new holes. So we can use new people for that. We can also use new environments and getting views from other people externally. So your friends who are in different fields, what do you think about this? How would you approach it? Don't get me wrong, a lot of the times nothing will come from it, but it's much easier to do it like that than to stare at a page and try and come up with your ideas yourself, just because we have these walls that we don't even know about. The other thing is that I think with innovation, new ideas, I see it all the time now with advertising, marketing. If you come up with something first, you are the first mover. You're the one. You take a bit of risk, but if you come up with something first, you tend to get the best result out of it. The next best result is the people that jump on it straight away, the really quick ones. Now that's the person that comes up with it, and the people that get on it quickly, I'd say is about 5%. Then you see everyone else really slowly moving and copying it later, and they get far worse results. They might get some sort of small results. So ideally, we want to be really quick or have the new idea. Now, being really quick is just how attentive you are to it. But if you can come up with these new ideas and these new ways of looking at things, you have a massive advantage in whatever field you're in. So what I also want to say is we have new people, we have new environments. The other one is random objects. There is a massive history of innovations coming from random things people are looking at that have nothing to do with what they're trying to do. And I'm going to run through some examples of this for you straight away. So one of the famous ones is Einstein. He came up with this theory of relativity when he was looking up at a clock tower and he was watching the hands move. And he thought to himself, what if I was traveling at the speed of light right now? Because he was watching the clock. Because he'd been doing it all the time, and we're going to get onto as well how walking, driving, getting into different brain states allows thinking to happen. But a lot of people get new ideas just from going around and looking at things that are external to their environment. So Einstein came up with this theory of relativity while staring at a clock tower. We have Archimedes' displacement theory when he was in the bath, his eureka moment, and he noticed the water come up. And that was from somewhere external to what he was trying to do. He wasn't using the bath for that, per se. We have penicillin, Alexander Fleming. That was from a Petri dish mold. And he looked at it and went, oh my God. And that led to one of the biggest discoveries of all time. We have Velcro. Someone was walking his dog and he noticed things were sticking to his clothes, and that's how he came up with Velcro. The microwave. This was Percy Spencer. So he noticed the chocolate bar melt in his pocket when he had some kind of radio magnet on him, and the chocolate bar melted. And then he came up with the microwave. Not through dedicated focus, but through luck and different objects. So by going and taking ourselves and removing ourselves from the environment, it's often the shape of something that starts to lead to the innovation. Same thing with a slinky. Someone dropped a spring and the way it fell made him think, oh, that could be a toy. And dynamite, crisps, Teflon, there are loads of things, Post-it notes that come from very bizarre methods and looking at different things. That's the first way of doing it. So if we want to get new ideas, new ways of looking at things, we can change the people we're talking to. We can change the environment we're in, and we can go and just look at different objects and see if they work. There are so many examples of this with great discoveries. But the other way is the use of default brain states. So this is where you are not focusing on something and you allow your brain to start making connections. I have it a lot. I play this game Wordle on my phone where you have to you get put in a word and it tells you which letters are right, and you have to get this 5-letter word. You have 6 goes to get it. The amount of times I will look at this for ages and not get it. I will walk around for 5-10 minutes not thinking about it. I come back, I open it up, and I see it immediately. And the theory around this is very interesting. So I had a guy called Vince Walsh on my podcast a while back. Fantastic episode if you haven't listened to it. Perfect for people that like listening to podcasts with bad sound. I think it was like the third one we did, and the sound production was so bad. So it is still interesting if you don't mind a bit of crackling on my microphone. But Vince spoke about the science behind why that happens, why we get our ideas when we're not thinking about things and we're in different brain states. And he used this example of networking events. So if you imagine being at a networking event, say there's a keynote speech. During the keynote speech, you are looking at the person speaking, and you may be able to speak to the person on your left, and you may be able to speak to the person on your right. But mostly you're focusing on this person here. So you're not really going to share many ideas. You're kind of just focusing on that one thing. Now, when you go out into the coffee room, everyone then starts to mingle, and you're going to get far better exchange of ideas. Now, Vince says this is pretty much what happens in the brain. Now, Vince has published 300 different papers on the brain. He's worked with top sports teams, military units, businesses all over the place, Olympic teams. And he was saying essentially what happens is we have these shortwave connections. And when we're focusing on things, that's all our brain can do, the shortwave connections. When we go into different brain states, and I found different names for what it's called. The one I like the most is probably just the default brain, where it's not focused. And when we're in that default brain state, long range connections start to happen, and it happens subconsciously. So these ideas start to flow. Now, this happens when we go for a walk, when we go for a run, sometimes when we're exercising, when you're sat in the sauna, when you go for a drive, when you're on public transport. And these brain states, when you're in the shower, always lead to fantastic ideas because long-range connections are happening. Some people call it the incubation period of the brain. So if you've been thinking about something and then you go into one of these states, the likelihood of them starting to connect is better. So you have to have an intention first. So if you're looking at a problem, you're not getting anywhere, that's when you want to go and take yourself into one of these states. And there's also a very large history of people doing this and coming up with ideas. And I've noted a few down for you. So I'm just going to have a sip of my coffee. I've got my Christmas Cafe Nero cup here. Interesting one with Cafe Nero, actually. So I was speaking to someone who works at Cafe Nero in the corporate office, and apparently everyone that works at Cafe Nero has to do a week or so in the actual shop. I quite liked it from a cultural point of view because it means you learn the implications of the things you bring in because you've experienced it. I think it's something a lot of companies should do. Interesting one. But anyway, I found some great examples. There are loads. I picked out some of the highlights. So a famous one is Thomas Edison. Edison used to do this thing called idea naps, and he would use this sort of the lucid state, the liminal state of the brain in between sort of wakefulness and sleep. So what he would do is put these metal ball bearings in his hand, and he'd sit in his armchair, and as he fell off, he would release and drop them on the floor, and there'd be a metal plate underneath, and they'd wake him up, and they'd just keep him in that state, and he'd use them as idea naps to generate ideas. J.K. Rowling came up with the idea of Harry Potter on a train from Manchester to London when she was just commuting. Stephanie Meyer, who wrote Twilight, came up with that during a dream and then woke up and got it straight down. Same thing with a dream, periodic table. So Dmitry Mendeleev, if I'm saying that right, I hope no one's screaming at their headphones right now, came up with the idea of the periodic table of how to order that during a dream. And he'd been focused on it all day as well. So again, you see that setting of the intention, you're demanding it. The second you release the pressure, the ideas start to come. Beethoven often composed during long walks. He would actually be composing in his head during the long walk. Other walkers, we have Charles Dickens, Aristotle, Charles Darwin, all were very active walkers in the way of idea generation. George Orwell used to do a lot of his plot planning during a run. That's when he found his ideas. He would clear his head and allow ideas to flow. The Tinder co-founder came up with the idea of the swipe while he was in the shower. Now, shower thoughts are very common. We always win arguments in the showers. We always come up with our best ideas, whatever it is, in the shower. Now, this is a kind of a blend of those different objects and being in the shower. So the shower probably got that way of thinking, but what he did was wiping the steam off the screen. And so probably have that object of wiping, came up with the swiping, but the shower allowed that long-range connections to start connecting there. So all of these examples of people that use these states. So, and the reason for that is quite interesting. So I've spoken about Vince's theory. So what happens, we allow these long-range connections to happen. So when we're focusing on things, we need to give our brain that time to go and incubate the idea and start forming new things. Next comes the stats bit, because we're being quite anecdotal at the moment. So we know that walking boosts creative output by 60%. There are loads of different studies on this, loads, and you can look them up if you want. But there are some other things that also improve our creative ability. One of them is we are activated by positive states. When we're in certain moods, ideas will flow more naturally. I guarantee you, when you're frustrated and annoyed, ideas do not come as fast. You need to think about the mood you are putting yourself in if you want to come up with new ideas. So one of the big ones is excitement. So essentially, when you feel kind of electrified by an idea, your mind is almost primed for leaps. So it thinks, right, something exciting is happening here we go. And you'll have felt this when you're in groups and you have ideas and you go, oh my God, here we go. And that's the introduction of other people as well. So if you know you have someone, I have a good friend called Joey Speed. He is an ideas man. If I want to flesh out an idea, he's the person to speak to because he helps you get that excitement. And excitement leads to more thinking. So we know that certain mood states enhance creative thinking. So positive states do that. But also people who experience intense or extreme emotions on a regular basis will always score higher on creative capacity. Just an interesting stat. So if you want to start being more creative, try and create a mood first. Do something that's going to get you excited. Do something that's going to get you positive, because when you're feeling negative, it's much harder to produce. A few other things here as well. I want to talk about the self-imposed constraints. So a lot of people would say, so when it comes to ideation, if we have too many constraints on our time to come up with ideas, we don't produce very good ideas. So, you've got 2 minutes go and it's externally imposed, we don't come up with great ideas. But when we have too much time to come up with ideas, it's also worse for creativity. There is a middle optimum point for coming up with creativity. But also, if the constraint is externally imposed, i.e. someone gives you a timeline and says it has to be done by here, it doesn't help our creative output. If we self-impose one, it actually aids us. So it's very good if you're sat there with a blank page and you go, right, I'm going to give myself 1 day to come up with the first idea of my plot. A lot of authors used to use walking to come up with plot ideas, or commuting. So when you're sat there on a train with nothing to do, I actually get my best ideas all the time sat in the sauna. I don't know whether it's we're on our phones a lot more now. So when you're on your phone, you are basically constantly keeping yourself out of that default state that we want to get into. So when I go into the sauna and I have nothing to do, I just sit there, suddenly ideas start coming. Then the sauna gets too hot and then no ideas come. There is an optimum point in there where a load of different ideas have come. But when we impose constraints on ourselves that aren't too rigid, we actually have our best creative output. So saying I've got a day, saying I've got 2 hours, bringing that constraint in actually allows things to go. Then go for a walk, then come back, get it down. So that's on constraints. And that was a 2018 review of 145 empirical studies. And it found a U-shaped relationship. Too few constraints equals less creativity. Too many equals less creativity. In that middle, ideal. And now the tricky bit. So as you imagine, and you've probably heard, ideas are common, implementation is rare. Now this isn't on implementation, this episode. This is on creating ideas. So we know that if we don't actually do the thing we're thinking about, it means very little. But one of the biggest things that goes wrong with these ideas, and I have suffered this far too many times, is having the brilliant idea while I'm on a walk or something, thinking I've got it because it felt so powerful, and then I come back an hour later and I try and remember it and it's gone. And there are some worrying stats on this. We can lose up to 90% of new info within the first week if not revisited. So 90%. Now I know the stats on retention of learning pretty well, and they're pretty dire. We don't remember anywhere near as much as we think, but especially trains of thought. So we can lose things unbelievably quickly if we're not detailed and writing it down. So when you have this idea, it is very good to have a page of notes or a notepad at home or something you can get it down as quickly as possible. I have a page of notes on my phone, which it's so long now, when I open it, it starts lagging because there's too much on it. But I have this list. Whenever I need a piece of content or something like this, I go there, I scroll down, that's the one, I use that. And it's been a lifesaver. But every time I forget to do it, I forget the idea. Because you go on this train of thought with your idea and you think you're going to remember it, but you forget all the little details. And that's the other thing on it. When you write it down, it's about being unbelievably detailed with it. You may write down just the headline, but when you come back to it, you're kind of like, I don't really understand why this was worth writing down. So being detailed with it is also incredibly important. So, to summarize that, we need to use external people to dig new holes. External environments or foreign objects will trigger these new ideas. And then we can use our experience to dig those holes deeper, because we have the leveraged experience to develop those new ways of thinking. We need to give our brain time to think and make those long-range connections. The way we do that is by getting into that default state. Some people say beta, theta, whatever. There's lots of different ways of looking at it. We want to get into that default state of non-activation, non-focused thinking. Sauna, walking, driving, commuting, showering, exercising, all gets us into that state. Then we have to be disciplined enough to get it down quickly. If we do that, our ability to create more ideas is massively increased, as well as using mood, excitement, people that get us going. These are the ways that we can develop new ideas consistently. So instead of staring at a blank page and just trying to think your way out of it, try and use these things. How can you leverage? You'll be amazed at how many of the best ideas in the world come from not looking at a page and trying to get it down. It's all sparked by a bit of excitement and seeing something foreign. So I think I've gone on long enough there. hopefully this has been useful for you and it's given you a bit of impetus to slightly tweak the way you operate to get new ideas. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening and tuning into any of the other episodes from Human Alchemy and Ross Examination. Appreciate your time. We're going to be back in January, hopefully with some big guests and back with a bit of a bang. So make sure to tune in then. And as always, if you made it to the end, thank you very much. And if you have any feedback, please let us know. But until January, have a fantastic Christmas and New Year. All the best.